This is Natalia from WSA. I am obviously not Dave Jensen, as the slide suggests. Unfortunately, in the never-ending saga of technical issues here at WSA, the webinar we had recorded with Dave lost its audio during a conversion process, but he was gracious enough to let me use his slides and talk over them for today's webinar. So welcome to our presentation all about pet waste in your community. Dave is the director of franchise development for DoodyCalls, and they are members of our consortium. They were founded in Virginia in 2004. They became the first national pet waste removal franchise, and today DoodyCalls scoop the poop from coast to coast. Their mission is to make the world a happier and healthier place for people and pets. And some of the areas of expertise they have is they do everything from residential yard cleanings, community common area cleanings, both for pet waste and for goose waste. And they install and sell pet waste stations. They also service pet waste stations in your community. DoodyCalls is the only pet waste management company that designs and manufactures their own line of pet waste management products. We'll get into that a little bit more a little later. They are also the only pet waste management company that is certified by the Community Associations Institute to teach continuing education classes to community managers. So again, they are on our consortium, and if you needed an expert to come out and speak on pet waste, they would be willing to do it. WSA would probably be willing to do it. And they also have, if you happen to be in a community of do-it-yourselfers, good resources that you can use so that you can develop and implement your own pet waste management plans in your community. Today's presentation has three main components. The first is we're going to talk about why pet waste is such a big problem, including some of the environmental effects of pet waste. And then we're going to go over some solutions that you may want to consider implementing in your community. So one of the biggest problems with pet waste is there's just a lot of it. Almost half of US households have dogs, and the average dog deposits about 3/4 pound of waste a day. That's 30,000 tons of dog waste deposited every day in the US and 10 million tons per year. So that's a lot of waste. And another part of the issue is 100% of dog owners do not enjoy picking up after their pets. It's not pleasant, but it is a necessary evil. So taking that from the national down to Anne Arundel County, there's almost 95,000 households with dogs, and there's an average of 1.5 dogs per household. So there's over 141,000 dogs in Anne Arundel County. If they each deposit an average of 3/4 pound of waste per day, that's 53 tons of dog waste deposited every day and over 19,000 tons per year. And then studies show that 40% of pet waste is not picked up. So that's over 7,500 tons of waste that are left on the ground every year in Anne Arundel County. With that 7,744 tons of waste, I can't even say that number. There's over 161 billion fecal coliform bacteria that are left in the environment. That's over 48,000 pounds of nitrogen and over 154,000 pounds of phosphorus reaching our waterways each year just from pet waste. So any health department official from Anne Arundel County will say that pet waste is the biggest, if not one of the biggest, if not the biggest contributor to bacteria pollution in our waterways. As you know, too much nitrogen and phosphorus in water causes algal blooms. Those algal blooms don't allow the sun to penetrate down to the bottom of the water. Without the sun, the grasses can't grow. If the grasses can't grow, the fish don't have anything to eat. So it just ruins the entire ecosystem. So an interesting little fact, 2 to 3 days of droppings from 100 dogs can contribute enough bacteria to close the Chesapeake Bay and all of its tributaries within 20 miles to swimming and fishing. I'm sure, as a lot of you know, Anne Arundel County says that up to 48 hours after a 1-inch rainstorm, that waters are not healthy, swimmable, or fishable up to 48 hours after a 1-inch rain because of the bacteria levels, that bacteria that reaches the waterways via stormwater runoff. And then another big issue is there's a lot of bacteria in pet waste that can be and disease that can be transmitted from waste to people. Roundworm is one of them. Crypto is one of them, and Giardia is one of them. So it's a public health issue as well. And then this is something really gross and something that I hadn't thought about until I started working with WSA, is that pet waste has a lot of protein in it. Dogs can't actually metabolize and break down all the protein in commercial dog food. So that protein actually becomes a food source for rats and rodents. So it becomes a much bigger issue if you don't deal with the issue. So that's just kind of gross and probably something that can be used to move your community towards action, get them to think about all the issues stemming from pet waste. Pet waste is a very common problem all across communities. It's the #1 complaint at homeowners association meetings, and it's unpleasant, it smells bad, and according to the Secretary of the Department of Environment, it accounts for 24% of the bacteria that pollutes our waterways here in Maryland. His quote says, "Dog owners can help us keep our waterways clean and safe for recreation by picking up after our pets 100% of the time." So now that we understand the doom and gloom of pet waste and all of its issues, what can we do about it? If you don't have a pet waste management plan in place already in your community, then a pet waste problem is inevitable. The solution is to implement a strategy to successfully manage the problem. You can be in a community that is very proactive and be do-it-yourselfers. You can form a committee, consult resources, and develop and implement your own plan. You can, one of the resources that DoodyCalls has available is they have a community pet waste management guide. It's a really good resource if you're in this do-it-yourselfer type category, to make sure that you do every step necessary to best manage the problem. You can also outsource to a specialist like DoodyCalls, or you can do a combination of the two. A good pet waste management plan or waste management option. So if you go with a pet waste management company, obviously they have extensive experience creating and implementing these plans. They can customize plans to meet your community's specific needs and their budgets. They already understand the importance of this issue, and they can assist with resident education. They may already have outreach materials that you can use, such as newsletter content. You can just plug and play into your community's newsletters or presentations. They know the different kinds of pet waste service stations you can use. They maintain them. They may even do common area cleaning. And they can do them regularly. So what are the elements of a good pet waste management plan? You have to have an educational component. You should know where the most commonly walked areas in your community are and effectively put pet waste stations so that they're as easy as possible to utilize. And you should also include some kind of common area cleaning if you have common areas in your community, such as a beach or a park. Education is both initial when you're developing your plan, and ongoing, just to make sure that people continue to take the right actions over time. You can do this in a number of different ways. There is no one size fits all. But for example, you can distribute monthly education materials. You can invite guest speakers. Obviously, WSA has a lot of resources on the topic. If or we can come speak to your community if you deem that that's the appropriate route to take. The initial education should educate residents through newsletters, board meetings. However, it is that your community often and most effectively disseminates information amongst itself. You should do that, and then you need to make sure you have ongoing education. A lot of people don't realize that Anne Arundel County has laws in place that if you're caught not picking up, you can be fined. So just making sure that people know the laws, the policies, neighborhoods. I know my neighborhood also has above and beyond fine. The city will fine you, and then the management property will also fine you. So just making sure everything is clear to pet owners in your community. Not all pet waste stations are created equal. You can see here on the left-hand side, there's the mesh trash can with the dispenser up top. The important thing is that each pet waste station has 3 parts. There's the sign, there's the bag dispenser, and there's a waste receptacle. The waste receptacles aren't all built the same, as I started to say before. On the left-hand side, you can see that this one is smaller than the one on the right, and it also has perforations in it, which means it's not as good at trapping smells. So you don't want these to be really close to people's homes, but if there are trails and if it gets emptied often enough, this may be the most cost-effective solution in your neighborhood. If there happens to be spots that are really close to people's homes or that are just much more trafficked than others, you may consider a bigger waste receptacle and one that better contains the smell, like the one on the right. So there is no one number of stations that you should have that every community needs. There's a number of factors that need to be taken into account, such as your community and park size, plan to account for community growth. If you're fully developed and there's no development that's going to happen, great. But if it's something where there's, developing a little further down the street, you may want to take into account that there's going to be additional foot traffic in your area soon. And then you want to use the correct type of station for the location, as I previously stated. You want to keep convenience in mind. People are not going to go out of their ways to use your pet waste station. So you want to place the stations at intersections of paths, and the goal is to make it easy to pick up a bag at the start of the walk and easy to drop it off by the end. Another consideration is there's different kinds of bags you can purchase. The roll bags are the ones we're probably all most familiar with, where you have to tear off the first bag and go about your way. The pro to these is that they are the lowest cost bag, but the con is they're susceptible to vandalism. You can always just grab one and keep going without realizing you haven't torn it. And studies actually show that you more expensive. You may want to consider them to limit the amount of plastic waste. They're also generally a little larger and easier to use than the roll bags. So how often should these pet waste stations be emptied? At a bare minimum, they should be emptied every other week. Some cans may require twice weekly service, so you just need to pay attention and know. And the frequency can always be adjusted by modifying the size of the receptacle. So if it's always full and it's always out of bags, you may want to consider more capacity. And lastly, you want to have some sort of common area cleanings as part of your pet waste management plan. Why do we need them if we have pet waste stations? Even with pet waste stations, there's always going to be something left behind. This waste come from. So it just improves the overall effectiveness. At a bare minimum, you should consider doing common area cleanings twice a year, once in the early spring, like I said, when everything melts, and probably once again in the fall. Like I said, the cold weather preserves the poop for spring surprises. So it's important. Pet waste management is an important and necessary aspect of keeping our water clean. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to either myself or anyone at WSA. Again, this was Natalia talking to you for the past half hour, or you can reach out to our consortium member, Dave Jensen, who works for DoodyCalls.